I still hear the screaming in my dreams, even though the paralytic prevented any sound from escaping their lips. 14 children, ages 6 through 13, brought to Conversion Bay 7 on Forge World Graia, strapped to my tables, looking at me with eyes that still held hope. My name is Tech-Priest Sigma-Seven-Rho, and for 42 years I transformed human beings into servitors for the Adeptus Mechanicus. Adults mostly, criminals, heretics, the condemned. But that day, they brought me children, orphans from an orc raid. No families, no futures, just work orders specifying conversion types. Labor servitor, maintenance servitor, processing unit. I activated the equipment like I'd done 8,000 times before. Made the first incision. Watched a 6-year-old's eyes go wide with terror he couldn't express, and discovered something the Mechanicus had hidden for 10,000 years. Children's minds don't die the way they're supposed to. This is what happens next. Chapter 1. The Manufactorum of Flesh. I wasn't always conflicted about my work. When I first arrived at Graia's biology's facilities, fresh from my initiation into the cult Mechanicus, I saw servitor conversion as holy work. Sacred even. Taking the worthless, criminals, heretics, the brain-damaged, the condemned, and transforming them into useful components of the Omnissiah's great machine. Waste into function. Chaos into order. The facility was located in Manufactorum Block 17, deep in Graia's industrial underbelly, where the constant hammering of forge presses drowned out any sounds from within. Appropriate, I suppose. The Mechanicus values efficiency, and screaming is inefficient. My mentor was Tech-Priest Dominus Xylos, a man, if you could still call him that, who had replaced 87% of his biological components with superior mechanical alternatives. He had been performing servitor conversions for 114 years. His expertise was undeniable. His compassion was non-existent, which he considered a feature rather than a flaw. Emotion is the weakness of flesh, he told me on my first day, his vocal synthesizer stripping any humanity from the words. We rectify that weakness through sacred conversion. The servitor feels nothing, knows nothing, wants nothing. It is perfection through subtraction. The conversion process was standardized, refined over 10,000 years into a brutal efficiency. First came the harvesting, subjects delivered from arbitrator holding cells, penal colonies, or sometimes just swept up from the underhive where nobody would miss them. Adults mostly. Criminals who'd exhausted the Imperium's limited patience. Heretics who'd spoken against the Emperor. Workers who'd failed their quotas too many times. They arrived shackled and drugged, barely conscious, already processed through the administratum as endless bureaucracy that had deemed them more valuable as components than as citizens. Each had a designation number, a conversion specification, and a work order detailing exactly what type of servitor they would become. I learned the categories quickly. Labor servitors for heavy lifting and repetitive tasks. Combat servitors for military support, their bodies augmented with weapons and armor. Cherubim, the small flying servitors crafted from infant corpses, used as messengers and attendants by the ecclesiarchy. Gun servitors, welded into weapon platforms. Medical servitors, their hands replaced with surgical tools. The Imperium's needs were endless, and servitor conversion met them all. The actual procedure took between 4 and 7 hours, depending on the complexity of the augmentation. The subject was strapped to the conversion table, reinforced adamantium with restraints rated for superhuman strength, though we rarely needed that capacity. The drugs kept them compliant. First came the cranial opening. A precision laser cut through scalp and skull, creating access to the brain. The subject was kept conscious during this phase. Unconsciousness complicated the neural mapping. Their eyes would move, tracking the lights above them, but the paralytic agents prevented any other movement. Sometimes they cried. The tears would run down into their ears as they lay flat on the table. Then the mind-wiping began. Xylos called it cortical simplification. Specific regions of the brain were destroyed through targeted electrical pulses, chemical injection, or in some cases, simple excision with surgical tools. The sections responsible for personality, Memory, emotion, higher reasoning, all removed or burned away. What remained was the motor cortex, basic sensory processing, and the parts necessary to follow simple commands. "We leave just enough," Xylos explained during my first observation. His mechadendrites working with inhuman precision inside a middle-aged man's skull. Too much removal, and the servitor cannot function. Too little, and traces of the original person may persist, causing complications. The balance is delicate. After the brain was properly simplified, the augmentation began. Cybernetic implants were installed directly into the neural tissue. Command receivers, work protocol wetware, pain suppressors if the servitor's function required physical sensation, or pain amplifiers if punishment protocols were needed. The mechanical components were integrated next. Replacement limbs, weapon systems, tool arrays, whatever the work order specified. Finally came the conditioning. The servitor was brought to consciousness, if that word still applied, and tested. It received commands through its neural implants and performed them. Lift this, carry that, shoot this target, weld this joint. If it responded correctly, the conversion was successful. If not, we went back into the skull and adjusted until it worked properly. The whole process had a rhythm to it, a terrible, efficient rhythm. We processed between 8 and 12 subjects per day, 1,763 servitors in my first year alone. Each one a person transformed into a thing. Each one a small horror that I learned to ignore because the alternative was questioning the Imperium itself, and questioning led to heresy, and heresy led to becoming a subject yourself. I learned to see them as numbers. Designation Alpha 729, conversion type, labor heavy, status, successful. Next subject. It helped that I rarely saw the subjects before they were drugged. They arrived already processed, already sedated, already reduced to work orders and specification sheets. It was easier to perform the sacred duty of conversion when you didn't have to look into their eyes and see them begging silently through the paralysis. But I was good at my work, exceptionally good. My conversion success rate was 97.3%, well above the facility average of 92.1%. My servitors rarely malfunctioned. My augmentation integration was clean. My cortical simplification was precise enough to remove personality while preserving function. Xylos noticed. Within 3 years, I was promoted to senior conversion specialist. Within 5, I was training new adepts myself, teaching them the precise measurements and techniques that made the difference between a functional servitor and a drooling vegetable that had to be recycled for parts. I was proud of my work, proud of my efficiency, proud of my contribution to the Omnissiah's grand design. I had found my purpose within the Mechanicus, and I served it with mechanical devotion. The facility hummed with productivity, dozens of conversion tables operating simultaneously, each one transforming another piece of human waste into useful machinery. The air smelled of counterseptic, ozone from the laser cutters, burned flesh from the cauterization, and the particular metallic scent of exposed brain tissue. After a while, you stopped noticing. After a while, it just smelled like work. I lived in a small cell adjacent to the facility, slept 4 hours per night, ate nutrient paste that met my biological requirements without wasting time on pleasure or taste, prayed to the Omnissiah each morning, thanking the machine god for the privilege of service. My life had purpose. My work had meaning. I was content in the way a properly functioning machine is content. I performed my designated task without error or complaint. The other adepts were similar. We rarely spoke except about work. Personal connection was unnecessary and potentially distracting. We were tools of the Mechanicus, and tools don't need friendship. Some of the senior tech-priests had replaced their emotional centers entirely with logic engines, literally incapable of feeling empathy or distress. Xylos recommended I consider the same augmentation, but I delayed. Some small meat-based part of me wanted to retain that capability, though I couldn't articulate why. Looking back now, I think that hesitation saved me. Saved my soul, if I still have one. Because when the children arrived, I still had enough humanity left to recognize what we were about to do as an abomination, rather than just another work order. But that recognition came later. For 17 years, I performed my duty without question. 17 years of converting the condemned into servitors. 17 years of believing the Mechanicus doctrine that this was necessary, holy, correct. 17 years of sleep undisturbed by doubt or guilt. Then came the morning when Xylos summoned me to his office with a special work order. 14 subjects, juvenile, ages 6 through 13. Conversion type, various. Priority, immediate. Special requisition from the Departamento Munitorum, he said, his mechanical voice devoid of anything resembling concern. Orphans from the latest orc raid on the agricultural settlements. No families, no guardians, insufficient scholar progenium placement available. The administratum has determined that conversion to servitor status provides maximum utility for the Imperium. I stared at the work order, saw the age designations. 6 years old, 7, 9, 11, 13. Children. This is standard procedure, I asked, my biological vocal cords betraying a tremor that my augmented portions would never have allowed. Rare, but permissible under Regulation 7 Gamma of the Tithe Compliance Codex, Xylos replied. Juvenile subjects present unique challenges. Their neural plasticity requires modified techniques, but the conversion is feasible. Your expertise makes you ideal for this assignment. You will supervise personally. I wanted to refuse, wanted to say this was wrong, was evil, was exactly the kind of grimdark horror that made the galaxy the nightmarish hellscape it was. But I was a tech-priest of the Adeptus Mechanicus, and we followed orders. We served the Omnissiah. We did not question. Understood, Dominus, I said. When do the subjects arrive? They are already in holding. You may begin immediately. I walked to the holding cells on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else, pushed open the reinforced door, and saw them. 14 children, huddled together on the bare floor, faces dirty from the underhive processing, eyes wide with fear. The youngest was clutching a ragged stuffed animal, a crude thing, probably homemade. They looked at me with the universal expression of terrified children throughout human history. Please don't hurt us. One of the older ones, a girl maybe 12 or 13, stepped forward. Are you taking us to the new orphanage? She asked, her voice carrying desperate hope. They said we'd be taken care of. They said the Emperor provides. I looked at her through my augmented eyes, measuring her cranial dimensions, calculating the necessary incision points, estimating which parts of her brain could be safely destroyed while maintaining motor function. The technical assessment happened automatically, trained reflex from 17 years of conversions. But underneath the technical analysis, something else was happening. Something biological and chemical and entirely flesh-based. Something the Mechanicus would call weakness, but humans would call horror. These were children, and I was going to hollow out their minds and turn them into machines. Yes, I lied through my vocal synthesizer. We will take care of you. The Emperor provides. The girl smiled. Actually smiled. Relieved. She turned to the younger children. See, I told you, we're going to be okay. I left the holding cell and returned to the conversion floor, prepared the tables, calibrated the equipment, mixed the chemical compounds, did everything with perfect technical precision while something inside my organic brain screamed in protest. At some point, I would have to choose between duty and conscience, between the Mechanicus and humanity, between being a proper tool of the Omnissiah and being something that still deserved to be called human. But that moment hadn't arrived yet. The children were in holding. The work order was issued, and I was still, for a few hours more, an obedient servant of the machine god. I didn't know it then, but that day would change everything, would shatter my faith, would force me to see what I'd been doing for 17 years with new eyes, would start me down a path that ended with me here, decades later, telling you this story. But in that moment, I was just preparing for another conversion, exceptional only in the age of the subjects, nothing more. The machines hummed. The counterseptic smell filled the air, and in the holding cell, 14 children waited to be taken care of, trusting that the Emperor provided. He didn't. Chapter 2. The First Conversion. They brought the first child out at 0900 hours. Designation Sigma Child 1. Male, age 6. The youngest. The one with the stuffed animal. 2 servo-skull attendants guided him down the corridor toward the conversion floor. He walked between them, still clutching his toy, looking around with the curiosity of a child too young to understand real danger. When he saw me, he waved. Actually waved. A small, innocent gesture that children perform without thinking. "Hello, strange metal man. Are you a robot?" That's what children asked when they saw tech priests. "Are you a robot? Are you a space marine? Are you going to save us from the monsters?" "Hello," I said through my synthesizer, and the mechanical distortion of my voice made him giggle. Children always giggled at the voice, found it funny rather than frightening. "You sound weird," he said, "like the voxcasters in the shelter during the orc attack. Are you going to help us?" "Yes," I said. The lie came easier this time. "I'm going to help you." The servo skulls guided him to the conversion table. He climbed up on it himself, chattering about the orcs, about how loud they were, about how his mother had hidden him in the cellar. But then the building fell down, and he was alone and scared. But the soldiers found him and said he'd be taken care of. His mother was dead. He didn't seem to fully grasp that yet, or perhaps he did and was choosing not to believe it. Children are remarkably resilient that way. The mind protects itself through denial. I activated the restraints. They closed around his small wrists and ankles, locking into place with magnetic seals rated for adult strength. Massive overkill for a 6-year-old, but the equipment wasn't designed with children in mind. "Why do you need these?" he asked, tugging at the restraints experimentally. "I'll be good. I won't move." "It's for safety," I said. "The procedure requires you to stay very still." "What procedure? Are you giving me medicine? My mum gave me medicine when I was sick. It tasted bad, but it made me better." I prepared the first injection, a cocktail of paralytic agents, sedatives, and neural suppressors, designed to keep the subject calm and immobile during the conversion. My mechadendrites moved with practiced efficiency, filling the syringe, finding the vein in his small arm, preparing to inject. And I stopped. Just stopped. My mechadendrite frozen in position, the needle millimeters from his skin, because I was looking at his face, seeing the trust there, the absolute certainty that the adults around him would keep him safe, because that's what adults did. "Is that the medicine?" he asked, looking at the syringe with mild concern. "Does it hurt?" "No," I said. "You won't feel anything." That was true, technically. Once the injection took effect, he wouldn't feel the cranial opening, the brain destruction, the augmentation installation. He wouldn't feel any of it. The paralytic would lock his body while leaving his consciousness present. We needed neural feedback during the conversion, but the pain receptors would be blocked. He wouldn't feel his childhood being burned away, wouldn't feel his personality being excised, wouldn't feel the moment his self ceased to exist and he became a thing. But he would be aware, would see what was happening, would understand, in whatever limited capacity a 6-year-old could, that something terrible was being done to him, would die conscious, not physically, but in every way that mattered, knowing that the adults he trusted had betrayed him. I looked at Xylos, who was observing from his station. "Dominus," I said carefully, "I request clarification on the work order. The subject is exceptionally young. Perhaps additional sedation would be appropriate. Complete unconsciousness rather than standard paralytic protocols." Xylos's mechanical eyes focused on me with laser precision. "The standard protocols exist for optimal neural mapping during conversion. Consciousness is required for proper feedback. You know this, Sigma-Seven-Rho. Your 17 years of experience have never required such clarification. Why do you hesitate?" Why did I hesitate? Because he was 6. because he trusted me. Because somewhere in my augmented brain, in the sections I hadn't yet replaced with cold logic, something was screaming that this was wrong in ways I couldn't articulate through Mechanicus doctrine. The juvenile neural plasticity may respond differently to consciousness during conversion, I said, grasping for technical justification. Risk of psychological trauma patterns persisting post-conversion could affect servitor function. It was a reasonable technical argument, and it was complete bullshit. I was stalling, trying to find some way to not do what I'd been ordered to do. Xylus processed this for exactly 3 seconds. Your concern is noted but overruled. Proceed with standard protocols. The Omnissiah demands efficiency, not sentiment. The boy was watching our exchange with growing confusion. Are you talking about me? Why does the metal man sound angry? He's not angry, I told the child. We're just making sure we do everything correctly, to help you. Okay, he said, accepting this immediately with the absolute faith of childhood. My mom always said it's important to do things right. She was really smart. She could fix anything. She fixed my toy when it ripped. He held up the stuffed animal, showing me a crude patch job with mismatched thread. See? She made it better. Something broke inside me. Some carefully maintained barrier between duty and conscience. Because his mother had fixed his toy with love and care and whatever limited resources she'd had, and now her son was strapped to my table and I was about to destroy everything she'd loved about him. I injected the paralytic anyway. His eyes widened as the chemicals hit his bloodstream. His mouth opened to say something, but the paralytic was already taking effect, freezing his vocal cords, locking his body in place. Within seconds, he couldn't move at all, could only breathe through mechanical reflex and watch through terrified eyes as we prepared to cut open his skull. The terror in those eyes was something I'd never seen in adult subjects. Adults understood what was happening. The condemned knew they were dying, just in a particularly horrific way. But this child didn't understand. Couldn't understand. Only knew that something was wrong, that he couldn't move, that the trusted adults were doing something that felt bad. Tears leaked from the corners of his eyes. That was the worst part. The paralytic stopped everything except the autonomic functions like tears and breathing. So he cried, helpless and terrified, while I activated the laser cutter. Beginning cranial access, I announced for the facility records. My voice was steady, professional, betraying nothing of the moral collapse happening beneath my augmented exterior. The laser cut through his small scalp with medical precision. The smell of burning flesh filled the immediate area. The counterseptic couldn't fully mask it. The bone saw activated next, cutting through the thin skull of a 6-year-old with the same efficiency it cut through adult craniums. I'd done this 8,417 times. This was number 8,418. The procedure was identical. My hands, both organic and mechanical, moved with the same practiced precision. But everything was different, because I was looking at his eyes, watching the terror and confusion there, seeing the exact moment when some part of his child's brain, even through the sedatives and neural suppressors, understood that he was going to die. The skull section came free. I set it aside and exposed his brain, smaller than an adult brain, still developing, full of potential that would never be realized, full of memories, his mother, his home, his toy, whatever small joys and traumas had filled his 6 years of life, that I was about to erase. The neural probe activated. I inserted it carefully into his cerebral cortex, mapping the regions. His frontal lobe, still developing, full of the capacity for future reasoning and personality. His hippocampus, storing memories of his mother, his home, everything he'd experienced. His amygdala, processing the terror he was feeling right now. All of it had to go. The work order specified a basic labor servitor. Lift, carry, obey, nothing else required. I would burn away everything that made him human and leave just enough to follow simple commands. Neural mapping complete, I announced. Commencing cortical simplification. The electrical probe moved to his frontal lobe. I activated it, sent the current through his developing brain tissue, watched the neurons fire wildly and then die as the electrical shock destroyed them systematically. His eyes changed. Something left them. Some spark of consciousness, of self, of whatever made a person. It went away as his frontal lobe died, and I watched it happen in real time through his pupils. I continued the procedure, destroyed his hippocampus next, burning away every memory. His mother's face, the sound of her voice, the feeling of safety when she held him, the taste of whatever food she'd managed to provide, the comfort of his stuffed toy. Every single thing that made up his short life, gone, erased, reduced to burned tissue and dead neurons. The amygdala next, the fear center. Ironic that the last thing I destroyed was his capacity for fear, after making him experience such absolute terror. But that was necessary. A servitor that could feel fear would malfunction. Better to remove the capacity entirely. When I was done, his eyes were empty, still open. The paralytic kept them that way, but nothing looked out from behind them anymore. The person who'd waved at me, who'd shown me his patched toy, who'd trusted that adults would keep him safe, gone, dead in every way that mattered, even though his heart still beat and his lungs still breathed. Cortical simplification complete, I said, beginning augmentation installation. The rest was mechanical, installing the neural implant that would receive commands, replacing his small arms with industrial servo lifters rated for 200 kilograms, massive overkill for his body mass. But servitors grew as they aged, and the Mechanicus built for longevity. Installing the work protocol wetware that would drive him to lift, carry, obey without question or rest. I worked with mechanical precision while something inside me screamed, finished the augmentation, ran the diagnostics. Everything functioned perfectly. My conversion skills remained flawless, even while my soul, if I still had one, was breaking. Conversion successful, I announced. Designation Sigma Child 1 is now operational. Labor Servitor ready for assignment. Xylos approached, inspecting my work with his augmented vision. Acceptable quality, he said. You may proceed with the remaining 13 subjects. I expect completion within the standard time frame. 13 more. 13 more children to hollow out. 13 more betrayals of trust. 13 more small deaths performed with technical precision. The servitor that had been a 6-year-old boy sat up when commanded. Moved to the designated storage area when ordered. Stood there, waiting for instructions, mechanical arms hanging at its sides. The stuffed toy had fallen to the floor during the conversion. The servitor stood over it, unseeing, unremembering, unaware that it had ever meant anything. I picked up the toy, looked at the crude stitching where his mother had repaired it with love. Looked at the servitor that no longer knew what toys were, what mothers were, what love was. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I could not do this 13 more times. Could not hollow out 13 more children. Could not maintain the fiction that this was holy work, sacred duty, necessary evil. Something had to change. I had to change. Or I had to stop this. Or I had to die trying. But I had 13 more work orders. And I was still, for a few hours more, an obedient servant of the machine god. The question was, how much longer would I choose to remain obedient? Chapter 3. The Discovery. I didn't stop. That's the terrible truth. I continued with the second child, and the third, and the fourth. Did my duty while my conscience screamed. Performed each conversion with perfect technical precision, while something inside me died alongside each child. But I started measuring things I wasn't supposed to measure. Between conversions, while the servo skulls prepared the next subject, I analyzed the neural data from the first child. Standard procedure was to record neural activity only during the conversion process itself. We needed that data to ensure proper function. But I expanded the monitoring, examined the patterns, looked deeper than I'd ever looked before. And I found something impossible. The child's higher brain functions were destroyed. I'd done that myself, burned away the frontal lobe and hippocampus with careful precision. The neurons responsible for personality, memory, and complex thought were dead tissue now. The scans confirmed it. Those brain regions were gone, but there was still activity. Neural patterns that shouldn't exist in a properly converted servitor. Tiny electrical signals in the dead tissue, like echoes of the person who'd been there. Fragments of patterns that resembled memory formation, emotion processing, pain recognition, all things that servitors weren't supposed to experience. I checked my equipment, ran diagnostics. Everything functioned perfectly. The readings were accurate, which meant the conversion hadn't been complete. Something had persisted. Something remained of the child even after I'd destroyed the parts that made him a child. I pulled up the historical data. 8,417 previous conversions, spanning 17 years. Selected a random sample of 500 adult conversions. Analyzed their neural patterns post-conversion. The same residual activity was there. Weaker than in the child, but present. In every single servitor I examined, there were ghost patterns. Electrical echoes of the consciousness that had been destroyed. Like phantom limbs, but for the mind. The brain still trying to fire neurons that no longer existed. Still trying to process experiences with tissue that had been burned away. The servitors felt nothing. I'd believed that. The Mechanicus taught that. The entire doctrine of conversion relied on it. We weren't creating suffering machines. We were creating functional tools from human waste. The destruction of consciousness was complete and final. But the data suggested otherwise. Suggested that some fragment of awareness persisted. That the burned neural tissue still generated patterns. That somewhere in the converted servitor, something that had been a person still existed in some reduced, trapped form. I needed to test this. Needed to be sure. Because if I was right, if servitors retained some form of consciousness, then I hadn't been performing necessary conversion for 17 years. I'd been performing torture. Mass torture. 8,400 times. The second child was already on the conversion table. Female, age 7, designation Sigma Child 2. She was crying through the paralytic, terrified eyes watching me approach. I'd already begun the cranial opening. The skull section was removed, brain exposed. The neural probe was ready. Instead of beginning immediate cortical simplification, I expanded the neural monitoring, placed additional sensors on regions I normally wouldn't track, set up continuous recording that would monitor her brain activity before, during, and after the conversion. "You are deviating from standard protocol," Xylos observed from his station. "Explain the modification." "Quality assurance testing," I lied smoothly. "The juvenile subjects present unique neural characteristics. Additional monitoring will optimize future conversion protocols." He considered this for precisely 5 seconds. "Acceptable. Proceed." I proceeded, but now I was watching everything. Every neural pattern as I destroyed her frontal lobe. Every electrical echo as I burned away her hippocampus. Every signal that persisted, even after the tissue was dead. And I saw it happen in real time. Watched her consciousness fragment rather than disappear. Watched the electrical patterns scatter into the remaining brain tissue like a person breaking into pieces. Watched those pieces continue to generate activity even after the regions they originated from were destroyed. It was like watching someone drown. Watched them go under, flail for the surface, scatter into bubbles of desperate breath-seeking. Except the drowning never ended. The person never fully went under. They just fragmented, dispersed, trapped in a state between existing and not existing. The conversion completed. Her eyes went empty like the first child's. The servitor sat up when commanded, moved when ordered. Everything functioned perfectly. Success by every official metric. But the neural monitoring showed persistent activity. Showed patterns that resembled pain processing, though she couldn't report pain. Showed patterns that resembled memory formation, though she had no memories. Showed patterns that resembled consciousness, though she had no self. I was creating something worse than death. I was creating trapped fragments of consciousness, locked inside bodies they couldn't control, experiencing existence without the ability to process or understand it. 8,419 times now, and every single one of them potentially still aware, still suffering, still trapped inside the servitor shells I'd created. I needed to be absolutely certain, needed to test this further, but carefully. Any obvious deviation from protocol would trigger investigation, and investigation would lead to questions I couldn't answer without revealing heretical doubt in Mechanicus doctrine. I continued with the third child. Male, age 9. Designation, Sigma Child 3. This time I varied the conversion technique slightly. Instead of complete destruction of the frontal lobe, I attempted selective destruction, removing only the sections absolutely necessary for servitor function, while leaving more tissue intact. The result was a servitor that took longer to respond to commands. That showed slight hesitation before obeying. That functioned at 92% efficiency instead of the standard 97%. But the neural monitoring showed stronger persistent patterns. More of the child remained, scattered and trapped, but more present than in the first two conversions. I immediately performed corrective procedures, destroyed the additional frontal lobe tissue I'd left intact, brought the servitor up to standard efficiency. The hesitation disappeared. The persistent neural patterns weakened. The correlation was clear. More brain destruction created more efficient servitors, but also scattered the consciousness more thoroughly. The standard protocol maximized servitor function by fragmenting the original person into the smallest possible pieces, distributing them across the remaining neural tissue where they generated ghost patterns without affecting performance. We'd refined torture into an exact science. 10,000 years of development had created the perfect method for fragmenting a person while keeping the body alive and functional. The Mechanicus called it holy conversion. I was beginning to understand it was something far darker. By the fifth child, I had enough data to be certain. I pulled archives, analyzed historical records, examined neural patterns from servitors across Graia's entire facility network, requested data transfers under the guise of research optimization, built a statistical model covering thousands of conversions. 94.7% of servitors showed persistent neural patterns. The fragments were small, probably not enough to constitute full consciousness, but they were present, active, ongoing. And in juvenile conversions, the patterns were stronger. Children's brains were more plastic, more resilient, more resistant to complete destruction. When I burned away a child's frontal lobe, the remaining brain tissue attempted to compensate, tried to rewire itself around the damage, generated stronger ghost patterns as it fought to maintain consciousness, even after the regions that housed consciousness were destroyed. The 6-year-old showed the strongest patterns. His young brain had resisted the destruction most effectively. Whatever remained of him inside the servitor was more present, more aware than any adult conversion I'd examined. I had created something that might be worse than death, had taken a terrified child and trapped fragments of him inside a body that couldn't stop working, couldn't feel properly, couldn't understand what had happened, had created a living hell disguised as a functional tool. The Mechanicus believed servitors felt nothing because they showed no signs of suffering, no screaming, no resistance, no expressions of pain. But that was because we'd destroyed their ability to express suffering, not their ability to experience it. It was like paralysis. The 6-year-old had been paralyzed during conversion, unable to move or scream despite being terrified. The servitor was permanently paralyzed in the same way, unable to express the ghost consciousness trapped inside it, unable to do anything except obey commands with mechanical precision. I stood in the conversion facility, surrounded by 50 active servitors performing various maintenance tasks. 50 converted humans going through the motions of existence without complaint. The facility considered them successful conversions, perfect examples of the Omnissiah's wisdom. But if I was right, if the neural patterns meant what I thought they meant, then I was surrounded by 50 trapped consciousnesses. 50 fragments of people, scattered and confused, locked inside bodies that wouldn't stop working. Aware enough to experience existing, but not aware enough to understand it. and I had personally created 8,419 of them. The magnitude of what I'd done hit me like a physical force. 17 years of work, 17 years of believing I was performing holy duty, 17 years of creating what? Suffering? Torture? Something the Imperium didn't even have a word for because it was too terrible to acknowledge. The children were the worst. Their resilient brains resisted the destruction. The ghost patterns in Sigma Child 1 through 5 were stronger than any adult conversions I'd monitored. More of them remained trapped inside their servitor shells. More awareness fragmenting itself across damaged neural tissue, trying desperately to maintain consciousness even after the structures that housed consciousness were gone. I had to make a choice, had to decide what to do with this information, had to choose between being a loyal servant of the Mechanicus and being something that still deserved to be called human. The next child was waiting. Sigma Child 6, female, age 11. She'd watched me convert 5 of her companions already, had seen them carried out and brought back changed, empty-eyed and mechanical. She knew something terrible was happening, even if she didn't understand the specifics. When they brought her to the conversion table, she fought. Actually fought. The servo skulls had to use force restraints. She screamed, begged, called for her dead mother, called for the Emperor to save her, called for anyone to help. No one came. The Emperor didn't answer. I was the only one there, and I was the one who strapped her down and prepared the injection that would paralyze her terror into helpless silence. I looked at Xylos. I need a break. Personal biological requirements. You have had adequate rest periods, he replied mechanically. Complete the conversion first. Negative, Dominus. My organic components require immediate maintenance. Protocol 7 Delta allows for biological necessity to supersede work schedules. It was true, technically. Tech-Priests were allowed to address biological needs, despite the Mechanicus's disdain for the weakness of flesh. Xylos couldn't refuse without violating established protocol. 10 minutes, he said. Then you will resume. I left the conversion floor, went to my quarters, sat in the darkness and asked myself the question I'd been avoiding for 6 hours. What kind of person does this? What kind of person converts children into servitors? What kind of person discovers that those servitors might still be conscious, still aware, still suffering in ways we couldn't detect? What kind of person discovers that and then considers going back to finish the remaining 8 children? A loyal servant of the Imperium, that's who. A proper tech-priest of the Mechanicus. Someone who understood that individual suffering meant nothing compared to the vast machinery of humanity's survival. Someone who'd replaced empathy with efficiency. Someone who'd traded their soul for technical precision. But I still had enough organic brain tissue to feel sick. Still had enough humanity to recognize horror when I saw it. Still had enough conscience to know that what I was doing was wrong in ways that transcended doctrine and duty. The 10 minutes ended. I returned to the conversion floor. The 11-year-old was still strapped to the table, exhausted from struggling, tears streaming down her face. I picked up the injection, looked at Xylos, and made my choice. I cannot complete this conversion, I said. The facility went silent. Every servo skull froze. Every mechadendrite stopped moving. Xylos turned to face me with the full weight of his mechanical attention. Clarify, he said, his voice absolutely flat. The juvenile subjects present complications that standard protocol does not address. I have detected persistent neural activity in the converted subjects that suggests incomplete cortical simplification. Continuing conversions without addressing these complications would produce inferior servitors. I recommend suspending juvenile conversions pending further research. It was the safest way I could phrase my refusal. Framed as technical concern rather than moral objection. But Xylos wasn't fooled. You have converted 8,419 subjects without expressing such concerns. You have personally converted 5 juvenile subjects today without incident. Your success rate remains at 97.3%. There is no technical justification for your hesitation. He stepped closer. This is emotional interference. weakness of flesh clouding your judgment. Recommendation: you should undergo emotional suppression augmentation immediately. That won't be necessary, I said. I simply require additional time to analyze the neural data before proceeding. The work order is marked priority immediate. Analysis can occur post-conversion. You will complete the remaining 8 subjects according to schedule. I will not. The words hung in the air between us. Direct defiance, refusal of orders, heresy in everything but name. Xylos processed this for exactly 10 seconds. Then, you are relieved of duty pending disciplinary review. Report to Detention Cell 7 for observation. Tech-Priest Gamma-49 will complete the conversions. Guards appeared. Combat servitors, ironically. Former humans converted into weapons, now pointing those weapons at me. Ordering me to comply, following their programming without question or mercy. I could have fought, could have refused, could have tried to free the children. But what would that accomplish? I'd die or be converted myself, and the children would be processed anyway. The Imperium had infinite personnel. My individual defiance meant nothing, so I went to the detention cell, sat in the darkness, and listened to the facility hum as Gamma-49 completed my work. Heard the machines activate 8 more times. Heard 8 more children transformed into servitors while I did nothing. I had failed. Failed the children. Failed my conscience. Failed everything except my technical duty, which I'd performed with perfect precision right up until I couldn't anymore. But I had the data, had the evidence, had proof that servitors retained consciousness, that our holy conversion was creating suffering on a scale the Imperium didn't acknowledge. The question was, what could I do with that information? Chapter 4. The investigation. They kept me in detention for 3 days while the Mechanicus conducted their investigation. Not into what I'd discovered. They didn't care about that. Into why I'd hesitated. Why I'd allowed emotion to compromise my efficiency. Why I'd defied a direct order from my superior. The investigation was led by Magos biologist Thrain, a senior tech priest who'd replaced 93% of her organic components and considered emotion a disease to be eradicated. She reviewed my service record, examined my conversion data, analyzed my neural activity with deep scanning equipment. On the 3rd day, she came to my cell personally. "Your technical performance has been exemplary for 17 years, she said, her vocal synthesizer rendering the words without inflection. Success rate, 97.3%. 0 malfunctions. Optimal efficiency. You have been a model servant of the Omnissiah." She paused, examining me with augmented eyes that could see body temperature, heart rate, pupil dilation, every biological tell that might indicate deception or instability. "Yet you refused a direct order, defied established protocol, allowed personal sentiment to interfere with your sacred duty. Explain." I'd had 3 days to decide how to respond. Could tell the truth, that I'd discovered persistent consciousness in servitors, but that would be dismissed as heresy or delusion. Could lie, claim temporary malfunction, but they'd detect the deception. Could say nothing, but silence would be interpreted as confirmation of guilt. So I chose a middle path. Partial truth wrapped in technical language. I detected anomalous neural patterns in the juvenile conversions, persistent electrical activity in destroyed brain tissue, ghost patterns suggesting incomplete cortical simplification. I deemed it necessary to investigate before proceeding with additional conversions. "Show me your data." I'd expected this. Had prepared. Pulled up the neural recordings on my data slate. Showed her the patterns, the persistent activity, the electrical echoes in dead tissue. She examined the data for exactly 47 seconds. Then, "These patterns are residual electrical discharge from dying neurons. Standard post-conversion activity. They cease within 72 hours. This is documented in conversion literature dating back 6,000 years. You should know this. The patterns in juvenile subjects are significantly stronger than adult conversions. The enhanced neural plasticity creates nothing of consequence. she interrupted. Stronger patterns simply indicate more vigorous cellular death. The patterns cease. The servitor functions. There is no complication requiring investigation. But what if they don't cease? What if some fragment of consciousness persists? It was the wrong thing to say. I saw her mechanical body shift, recognized the stance of a predator identifying prey. Consciousness requires intact neural structures, she said slowly. Destroyed tissue cannot house consciousness. To suggest otherwise is to question 10,000 years of Mechanicus doctrine. Is that your intention, Sigma-Seven-Rho? It was a trap. Admitting I questioned doctrine was heresy. Denying it was lying, which she'd detect. Either answer led to the same place. My intention is to understand the truth, I said carefully. To serve the Omnissiah through perfect knowledge, rather than assumed certainty. The Omnissiah's truth has been established. Your role is not to question, but to implement. She leaned closer, her mechanical face centimeters from mine. However, your service record warrants consideration. The Mechanicus does not waste functional components. You will be reassigned. No longer servitor conversion. You will work in maintenance and repair. Lower responsibility. Constant supervision. Prove your reliability, and perhaps future advancement remains possible. It was mercy of a sort. Demotion instead of conversion or execution. They were giving me a chance to redeem myself through obedience. What about the neural patterns, I asked. The data suggests nothing except your tendency toward heretical interpretation. The patterns are cellular death, nothing more. This matter is closed. Do not raise it again. She left. I was transferred to Maintenance Section 12, assigned to repair work on existing servitors rather than creating new ones. Given a small room, basic tools, constant observation by servo skulls that reported my every action. But they'd made a mistake. They'd put me in direct contact with hundreds of servitors, given me access to examine them, repair them, monitor their functions, given me the opportunity to gather more data. I worked during assigned hours with mechanical obedience, repaired damaged servitors, replaced worn components, performed routine maintenance, never deviated from protocol, never showed any sign of the questions consuming me. But I watched, measured, recorded data I wasn't supposed to record. The servitors came through my maintenance bay in endless rotation. Labor servitors with damaged servo arms, combat servitors with weapons malfunctions, medical servitors with degraded surgical tools, cherubim with failing grav engines. I repaired them all, and I examined their neural patterns. The ghost activity was present in every single one. Weak but persistent electrical patterns in destroyed brain tissue. Echoes of consciousness that shouldn't exist, but did. Most of the patterns were random noise, probably just cellular death as Margos Thrain had said. But some weren't random. Some showed patterns, rhythms, cycles that resembled circadian processes, responses that correlated with external stimuli, like a consciousness trying to wake up, trying to process information, trying to exist despite having no structures left that could support existence. I found one servitor, labor designation Sigma-893, with particularly strong patterns. According to his records, he'd been converted 14 years ago from a factory worker who'd fallen behind on production quotas. Standard conversion, no complications noted, but his neural patterns were different. Stronger, more organized, like something inside him was fighting harder than most to maintain consciousness. I ran extensive diagnostics under the guise of investigating a minor malfunction, mapped his entire remaining neural structure, found that his brain had attempted to rewire itself around the destroyed regions, had formed new connections, trying to recreate the functions that had been burned away. It hadn't succeeded. He was still a fully functional servitor, still following commands without deviation. But some part of him was trying. 14 years after conversion, some fragment was still fighting to be human again. I didn't know if that made it better or worse. Better that something remained, that the person hadn't been completely destroyed. Or worse, that they were trapped in an eternal failed attempt to reclaim consciousness they could never fully achieve. I began cataloguing similar cases, found dozens of servitors with unusual neural patterns. Most had been converted from individuals with higher intelligence, scholars, tech priests, military officers, people with developed minds that resisted destruction more effectively than average. And I found the children I'd converted. They came through maintenance after 2 weeks. Sigma Child 1 through 14, routine inspection for newly converted servitors. The 6-year-old was first. He walked into my bay on mechanical legs far too large for his small body, servo arms hanging at his sides, empty eyes staring at nothing. His neural patterns were the strongest I'd ever measured. His young brain was fighting the conversion with everything it had. The ghost patterns weren't random noise. They were organized, purposeful, desperate. Like someone screaming without a mouth. Like someone trying to remember without a mind. I wanted to smash the equipment. Wanted to scream. Wanted to somehow reach into his broken brain and pull out the fragment of consciousness still trapped there. Give it peace. Give it death. Give it anything except this eternal half-existence. Instead, I performed routine maintenance. Calibrated his servo arms. Checked his command receivers. Certified him as functional. Sent him back to his assigned duties. And I took complete neural recordings. Documentation that would prove what I'd discovered. Evidence that consciousness persisted post-conversion. Proof that servitors suffered in ways the Mechanicus refused to acknowledge. I gathered data for 6 months. Examined 417 servitors. Documented persistent neural patterns in 393 of them. Built an undeniable statistical analysis showing that consciousness fragments remained active in 93.8% of conversions. The question was, what could I do with this information? Reporting it through official channels would accomplish nothing. Magos Thrain had already dismissed my concerns. The Mechanicus had 10,000 years of doctrine supporting servitor conversion. My data would be classified as malfunction, corruption, or heresy. I could go public. Release the data to the administratum, to the ecclesiarchy, to anyone who might care that the Imperium was creating millions of suffering consciousnesses. But who would listen? Who would believe a disgraced tech priest over the entire Adeptus Mechanicus? And even if they believed, would they care? The Imperium ran on suffering. This would just be one more horror in a galaxy full of them. I could try to mercy kill the servitors, end their suffering. But I had access to maybe a dozen servitors at a time, and Graia alone had tens of thousands. The Imperium had billions across its million worlds. I could spend my entire life mercy-killing servitors and not make a difference. Or I could try to prevent future conversions. Stop the process before more consciousness was trapped. But how? I was one tech priest under constant supervision, with no authority and no allies. The answer came from an unexpected source. One of the servitors I examined was different. Combat designation Theta 77. Former Tempestus Scion, converted after catastrophic injuries left him brain damaged beyond recovery. Or so his records claimed. His neural patterns were extraordinary, not just persistent, actively organized. He'd retained significantly more brain function than standard conversion should allow, enough that he might be more than a fragment, might be something approaching actual consciousness. I ran diagnostic after diagnostic, trying to understand how he'd survived the conversion with so much intact. Then I found it, an anomaly in his conversion records. The tech priest who'd performed the procedure had made an error, had missed several neural regions that should have been destroyed. Incomplete conversion, but he functioned perfectly, followed orders without deviation, showed no signs of the consciousness that my instruments detected raging inside his broken mind. I made a decision that probably damned whatever remained of my soul. I spoke to him, directly, without authorization or protocol. Just spoke to the servitor like he was a person. Can you hear me? Can you understand what I'm saying? Blink once for yes, twice for no. Nothing. No response. Just empty eyes staring forward, waiting for commands. You were Tempestus Scion Matthias Krell, orphan from Hive World Tertius, decorated soldier, injured in Xenos combat and converted to servitor status. If any part of you remains, if you can hear me at all, please respond. Still nothing. I was talking to myself, projecting consciousness onto neural patterns that probably meant nothing more than cellular death. Then his eye twitched. Just once. Barely perceptible. Could have been random muscle spasm. I held my breath. Was that intentional? Blink once if you're aware. The eye blinked. Deliberately. Slowly. Once. Sweet Emperor. He was still there. Still conscious. Trapped inside a servitor body for 3 years. Unable to move except through commands. Unable to communicate. Unable to do anything except exist in whatever hell his fragmented consciousness could perceive. Can you feel pain? 2 blinks. No. Can you think clearly? 2 blinks. No. Are you suffering? Long pause. Then 1 slow blink. Yes. I sat back, data slate, trembling in my hands. Here was proof. Undeniable proof. A servitor that could respond to questions, that retained enough consciousness to communicate, that confirmed the horror I'd suspected. I'm going to help you, I whispered. I don't know how yet, but I'm going to find a way to end this, to stop this, to make sure no one else ends up like you. 1 blink. Yes. Please. I had my purpose now. Had a witness who could prove servitors retained consciousness. Had evidence that would force the Mechanicus to acknowledge what they'd been doing for 10 millennia. I just had to figure out how to use it without getting converted myself. Chapter 5. The Conspiracy. I wasn't alone. That was the second revelation that changed everything. 3 days after my conversation with Theta 77, I received a data packet on my personal cogitator. No sender identification, no routing information. Just appeared in my system during the night cycle, bypassing all security protocols. The message was simple. We know what you've discovered. We can help. Maintenance Bay 7, 3rd shift, come alone. It was obviously a trap. Obviously surveillance or investigation trying to catch me in definitive heresy. Obviously the kind of thing a smart tech priest would report immediately to superiors. I went anyway, because I was desperate, because I needed allies, because I'd already committed to this path, and traps or not, I had to see it through. Maintenance Bay 7 was in the deep facility, far from supervision. When I arrived, 3 figures were waiting. All tech priests, all wearing the robes of the Adeptus Mechanicus, all standing in the shadows where servo skull surveillance had mysteriously failed. Sigma-Seven-Rho, said the first, a woman whose vocal synthesizer carried traces of emotion, unusual for the Mechanicus. We've been watching your work, your research into servitor consciousness, your defiance of conversion orders, your investigation of neural persistence patterns. Your surveillance, I said flatly. Here to document my heresy before conversion. We're resistance, she corrected. My designation is Epsilon 3 Omega. These are my associates, Delta 9 Kappa and Zeta 1 Phi. We are members of a group within the Mechanicus who've discovered the same truths you have. Servitor conversion is not the clean process doctrine claims. Consciousness persists. Suffering continues. And the Imperium has been creating billions of trapped minds for 10,000 years. I stared at them, processing. How many in this resistance? Across the Imperium? Maybe 5,000 tech priests who've discovered the truth and decided it matters. Here on Graia, 17 of us. Not many, but enough to make a difference if we're careful. What kind of difference? We can't stop servitor conversion. The Imperium depends on it. The Mechanicus will never acknowledge the problem. What can 17 tech priests possibly accomplish? Epsilon 3 Omega stepped closer. We can document. We can preserve evidence. We can prepare for the day when the truth can no longer be ignored. And in the meantime, we can reduce suffering where possible. How? She pulled out a data slate, showed me technical specifications. Modified conversion protocols. We've developed techniques that more completely fragment consciousness. Instead of leaving ghost patterns that persist indefinitely, we scatter them so thoroughly that no awareness can remain. It's kinder, in a way. Complete death instead of partial life. I looked at the specifications. The modifications were subtle, probably wouldn't be detected by standard oversight, but they would fundamentally change the conversion process, make it more destructive to neural tissue, ensure that nothing remained. You're making conversion more thorough, I said slowly. More complete, more efficient at destroying the person. Yes, she said simply, because incomplete death is worse than complete death. We can't stop conversion, but we can make it less terrible. It was pragmatic, logical, the kind of solution the Mechanicus would appreciate if they acknowledged the problem existed, but it meant accepting that servitor conversion would continue, meant working within the system rather than fighting it. What about ending conversion entirely? I asked. What about proving to the Imperium that this is wrong? We've tried, Delta 9 Kappa said, his voice heavy with defeat. We've compiled evidence. We've attempted to present it to high-ranking magi. We've even tried to reach the Fabricator General of Mars. Every time we're dismissed as delusional or heretical. The Imperium doesn't want to know. The system depends on servitors. Without them, the entire infrastructure collapses. They won't change no matter what we prove. So we just accept it. Make conversion slightly less horrible and call that a victory. We make whatever victories we can, Epsilon 3 Omega said. We document the truth so that someday, when the Imperium is ready to face it, the evidence exists. We protect each other so we're not all converted for heresy. And yes, we modify protocols where possible to reduce suffering. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. I wanted to reject it. Wanted to be righteous and uncompromising. Wanted to burn down the whole system rather than making it marginally less terrible. But I'd converted 8,419 people, had personally created that suffering, had no moral high ground to stand on. Show me the modified protocols, I said. We spent the next 6 hours reviewing their work. They'd been researching for decades, much longer than I had documented not just neural patterns, but behavioral signs of awareness in servitors, had catalogued subtle movements, micro-expressions, pupil responses that suggested consciousness fighting against the programming. They'd found thousands of servitors like Theta 7-7, partially aware, trapped, suffering, and they'd developed techniques to identify them, to separate them from the general servitor population, and to provide what they called mercy completion, additional neural destruction that finished what the original conversion had left incomplete. It was euthanasia disguised as maintenance, killing the trapped consciousness under the guise of equipment repair. Murder committed as an act of mercy. How many have you mercy completed? I asked. Here on Graia, 247 over the last 12 years, Epsilon 3 Omega said. Across the Imperium, our network has probably managed a few thousand, not many, but we save what we can. And the modified protocols. How many tech-priests are using them? Maybe 300. We spread them carefully, disguised as efficiency improvements. Most tech-priests who adopt them never realize they're performing more complete conversions. They just think they're following updated procedures. It was brilliant in a horrible way, changing the system from within, making conversion more destructive under the guise of making it more efficient, ensuring that future servitors wouldn't suffer like past ones had, even if it meant more thoroughly killing the people they'd been. I have a servitor who can communicate, I said. Theta 7-7. He retained enough consciousness to respond to questions. He confirmed he's suffering. If we could get him to testify somehow, he'd be destroyed immediately, Zeta 1 Phi interrupted. Classified as malfunctioning equipment, his consciousness would be erased, and we'd lose the evidence. We've tried before. Every time we find a communicative servitor, the authorities dispose of them before we can use them to prove anything. So what's the point? Why gather evidence if we can never use it? Because someday conditions might change, Epsilon 3 Omega said. The Imperium might face a crisis that forces them to reconsider. A political shift, a religious reformation, a logistical catastrophe. When that moment comes, we need the evidence ready. Need proof that can't be dismissed or ignored. That's the long game. That's what we're building toward. It was a game that might take centuries, might take millennia, might never pay off, but it was something. More than the nothing I'd been able to accomplish alone. What do you need from me? I asked. Your data, your research, your analysis of juvenile conversions. That's valuable. Children's neural patterns resist destruction more effectively, which means they suffer more completely. If we can get the Mechanicus to stop converting juveniles specifically, that would be a victory. Small, but real. I transferred my data, everything I'd collected over the months. Neural patterns, statistical analysis, recordings of the children's conversions, evidence of suffering that I couldn't prove but couldn't deny. What about Theta 77? I asked. Do I mercy complete him? They exchanged looks. Finally, Epsilon 3 Omega said, that's your choice. We can keep him as evidence, hidden, protected, maintained as proof if we ever get the chance to use it. Or you can end his suffering now. Both options have value. Both have costs. I thought about the Servitor. Thought about Matthias Krell. The Tempestus Scion trapped inside the machine. 3 years of existence in whatever fractured hell his consciousness perceived. Probably decades more ahead of him. Servitors lasted long. How long can you keep him hidden if we preserve him? Years, maybe. But conditions change. Security increases. Surveillance expands. Eventually, he'd be discovered. Eventually, you'd be implicated. The cost of keeping him might be both your lives. And if I mercy complete him now, he finds peace. You lose evidence. The Imperium continues unchanged, but one person stops suffering. It was an impossible choice. Save one person now, or potentially save thousands later. Compassion or strategy. Mercy or utility. I made the only choice I could live with. I'll complete him. One person's suffering for decades can't be justified by the possibility of future change. Epsilon 3 Omega nodded. Then we'll help. Make it look like routine maintenance failure. No investigation, no questions. Theta 77 will just stop functioning, be recycled for parts, disappear into the system. Clean, merciful. When? Tomorrow. 3rd shift. Maintenance Bay 7. Bring him here for scheduled repair. We'll handle the rest. I left the meeting with new allies, new purpose, and new guilt. Because I was about to kill a man to end his suffering. Murder disguised as mercy. The same thing the Mechanicus did with Servitor conversion, just honest about the reality. But at least Matthias Krell would find peace. At least one trapped consciousness would be freed from the hell we'd created. It wasn't much, but it was something. The next day, I completed Theta 77. Shut down his neural functions with careful precision. Watched the ghost patterns finally cease. Watched whatever remained of Matthias Krell disappear from measurable existence. His last communication, transmitted through careful eye movements before the end. Thank you. 2 words from a man who'd been dead for 3 years, but kept fighting to exist. 2 words that confirmed everything I'd discovered. 2 words that justified the choice I'd made. I certified his body for recycling, watched them take him away, and knew that I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. I wasn't a researcher anymore, wasn't even a rogue tech priest documenting inconvenient truths. I was actively working against the Imperium, killing servitors, spreading heretical modified protocols, participating in a conspiracy that would get everyone involved converted or executed if discovered. But I'd also found purpose, found allies, found a way to make some small difference in an Imperium built on suffering. The children I'd converted were still out there, still trapped, still suffering. I couldn't save them, couldn't undo what I'd done. But I could prevent future children from the same fate, could work with the resistance to stop juvenile conversions, could modify protocols to make conversion more complete and therefore less terrible. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. The war would be long, might never be won. But at least I was fighting it now instead of being part of the problem. At least I'd chosen a side. Chapter 6. The Price of Knowledge. The resistance work consumed the next 5 years of my life. By day, I performed routine maintenance on servitors, never deviating from protocol, maintaining perfect adherence to Mechanicus doctrine. By night, I documented suffering, modified conversion protocols, and worked with Epsilon 3 Omega's network to reduce the horror where we could. We saved hundreds of servitors through mercy completion, found the ones with strong persistent neural patterns, the ones most likely aware, most likely suffering, and ended them quietly, made it look like equipment failure, component degradation, anything except deliberate termination. We also prevented conversions where possible. Not many, we couldn't stop the system, but occasionally a work order would arrive that we could delay, redirect, or complicate enough that the subject was assigned alternative punishment. 23 lives saved over 5 years. Not many in an Imperium that converted millions annually, but 23 people who didn't end up trapped in servitor shells, and we modified protocols. Spread our improved conversion techniques through the Mechanicus network, disguised as efficiency updates. Got them adopted on 17 Forge Worlds. Every conversion performed with our protocols was more complete, more thorough, less likely to leave conscious fragments trapped and suffering. Small victories, measured in individual lives while the system ground on unchanged, but the work had costs. Zeta 1 Phi was discovered first. He'd been too aggressive with mercy completions, terminated too many servitors too quickly. Pattern recognition algorithms flagged the anomaly. Investigation followed. He was arrested, interrogated, and converted. We watched one of our own become the thing we'd been fighting against. Watched him transformed into a servitor and assigned to waste disposal duties. I examined him during routine maintenance, checked his neural patterns, found strong persistent activity. His consciousness hadn't been properly destroyed. He was trapped inside the servitor, aware enough to know what had been done to him. The Mechanicus had created its own twisted punishment for his heresy. Epsilon 3 Omega wanted to mercy complete him, end his suffering, but I refused. He knew the risks, chose to fight anyway. Giving him peace now invalidates that choice. Let him serve as a reminder of what we're fighting against. She looked at me, with what might have been disappointment behind her augmented eyes. You've become hard, Sigma-Seven-Rho. Calculating, cold. I've become realistic. We can't save everyone. Can't even save ourselves if we're caught. The best we can do is make the right tactical choices about who to save and when. That's Mechanicus thinking. Efficiency over compassion. Have we become what we're fighting? It was a good question, one I couldn't answer, because she was right. I had changed. 5 years of resistance work had made me colder, more calculating, more willing to sacrifice individuals for the theoretical greater good. I'd become a better soldier in the war against servitor conversion by becoming less human myself. But the work continued. We adapted after Zeta's capture, became more careful, slower, more willing to watch suffering continue if ending it would expose us. Delta 9 Kappa died during a facility accident, or what looked like an accident. We suspected assassination, that someone had discovered his resistance work and arranged his death. But we couldn't prove it, could only add his name to the list of casualties in a war most people didn't know was being fought. The network continued to grow despite losses. New tech priests discovered the truth about servitor consciousness. Some joined us. Some tried to report it officially and were converted. Some just quietly looked away and tried to forget what they'd learned. By year 3, we had 47 active members on Graia. By year 5, 83. We'd built a real organization, had protocols, secure communication, dead drops for data exchange, had become sophisticated in our conspiracy, and the Mechanicus was noticing. Security increased across all biologist facilities. Servo-skull surveillance expanded. Random neural scans were instituted for tech priests, checking for heretical thought patterns, emotional interference, signs of defiance. 3 of our members were caught in these scans, converted. Added to the ranks of servitors, we mercy completed when we could reach them. Epsilon 3 Omega decided we needed to escalate. We've been defensive for decades, saving who we can, documenting evidence, spreading modified protocols. But we're not changing the system. We need to go public. Need to force the Imperium to confront what it's doing. With what? I asked. We have data that the Mechanicus dismisses as malfunction. We have testimony from heretics that nobody will believe. We have philosophical arguments about consciousness that the Imperium doesn't care about. What can we present that would actually change anything? We present the children. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Explain. She pulled up data files. The 14 children I'd converted 7 years ago. Still functioning. Still showing strong neural patterns. Still trapped. Juvenile conversions are rare. Special circumstances. If we can prove that children specifically retain consciousness, that their young brains resist destruction more effectively, we might get the Mechanicus to ban juvenile conversion at minimum. Save future children even if we can't stop adult conversion. And how do we prove it? What evidence can we present that hasn't already been dismissed? We don't present evidence, we present the children themselves. Stage a malfunction, make one of them break programming, have them speak, demonstrate awareness, prove they're still conscious inside the servitor. Force the Mechanicus to see it directly. It was brilliant and insane. Brilliant because a demonstrably conscious servitor child would be undeniable evidence. Insane because it would expose our entire network, because it would likely fail, because even if it succeeded, the Mechanicus might just destroy the evidence and execute everyone involved. Which child? I asked. Sigma Child 1, the 6-year-old. Strongest neural patterns, most likely to respond to intervention. We've developed a procedure that might temporarily restore enough neural function to give him speech, movement, awareness. Not much. Maybe 10 minutes before the restoration. She examined his neural patterns one final time before the end. Found the ghost consciousness still there, still fighting, still trapped after half a century. Wondered what kind of hell he'd experienced during those decades. Aware enough to know something was wrong, but not aware enough to understand it. Conscious enough to suffer, but not conscious enough to process the suffering. She performed the mercy completion with perfect technique. Watched the neural patterns finally cease. Watched whatever remained of the 6-year-old who'd waved at me with his stuffed animal finally find peace. "You're free now," she whispered to the inert servitor body. "I'm sorry it took so long. I'm sorry we couldn't save you, but because of you, because of what happened to you, thousands of other children were saved. Your suffering mattered. Your voice mattered. You changed the Imperium. The body was recycled for parts, as was standard. But she recorded his death in the official archives, noted his designation, documented his 51 years of service, ensured he wasn't just equipment failure, but a remembered individual whose death meant something. The other 13 children I'd converted were similarly mercy completed over the following decade. Each one recorded, each one remembered, each one honored in the small ways the reformed Mechanicus allowed. By year 60 post-Reformation, an entire generation of tech-priests had been trained in the new protocols. They'd never performed a pre-Reformation conversion, never created a servitor without ensuring complete consciousness destruction, never trapped a person in the particular hell I'd discovered. They knew the history, studied my work, watched the recordings, understood what had been done wrong for millennia. But they hadn't lived it, hadn't felt the weight of creating suffering they couldn't undo, hadn't carried the guilt of 8,419 conversions. And that was good. That meant the reforms had worked. That meant the next generation could perform their duty without the moral horror that had consumed me, could serve the Omnissiah knowing their work was as merciful as possible within the Imperium's constraints. But I wondered sometimes if some ghost of my consciousness persisted somewhere, watching the changes I'd helped create, whether the ease with which they performed conversions was troubling, whether forgetting the horror meant losing the motivation to keep improving, whether comfort with the process meant losing the drive to question it. The resistance network had been destroyed, yes, but new ones formed, always formed, because every generation of tech priests included those who looked too closely, who questioned too deeply, who refused to accept that the current state was the only possible state. They found my documentation, found the hidden archives, found evidence of how bad it had been and how far it had come, and they continued the work, pushing for more reforms, better protocols, greater consciousness detection, more mercy completions, continued improvement of an imperfect system. In year 75, the Fabricator General issued an official statement, brief, bureaucratic, grudging, but official. The Adeptus Mechanicus acknowledges historical suboptimal outcomes in servitor conversion procedures. Thanks to research by Tech-Priest Sigma-Seven-Rho and subsequent reforms, modern conversion protocols demonstrate improved efficiency with reduced complications. The Omnissiah's wisdom guides us toward continual optimization. It was the closest thing to an apology the Mechanicus would ever issue: acknowledgement without admission, credit without vindication, recognition without reconciliation. But it was something, carved in official record, undeniable, permanent. My name was cleared posthumously. My research was validated. My heresy was reclassified as premature orthodoxy. The Mechanicus's term for being right too early, for discovering truths before the institution was ready to accept them. Future tech priests would study my work not as warning, but as example, would be taught to question, to examine, to refuse to accept suffering as inevitable just because it was traditional. The Imperium remained a nightmare. The Mechanicus remained cold and cruel. Servitor conversion remained a necessary evil that destroyed people to create tools. Nothing fundamental changed, but the edges were softer, the cruelty was more conscious. The evil was more necessary and less casual, and thousands of people, especially children, were spared the particular horror I'd discovered and dedicated my life to eliminating. In the great accounting of souls, if such a thing existed, I'd created 8,419 instances of suffering. But I prevented tens of thousands more, had turned my guilt into purpose, had transformed my horror into action, had refused to accept that personal redemption was impossible just because the harm was irreversible. That was my legacy. Not the conversions I'd performed, those would be forgotten, lost in the statistical noise of the Imperium's endless atrocity, but the reforms I'd fought for, the children I'd saved, the protocols I'd developed, the evidence I'd preserved, the questions I'd forced the Mechanicus to confront. Small legacy, insufficient to balance the scale, but real. And in the Imperium of man, where heroism is measured in degrees of failure and success is defined as merely slowing the decay, real small legacies are the only kind that matter. Tech-Priest Sigma-Seven-Rho performed his first conversion in year 97 post-Reformation, used my protocols, followed my procedures, ensured complete cortical destruction, created a servitor that felt nothing, knew nothing, suffered nothing. And when he completed the conversion, when he certified the new servitor as functional and ready for service, he whispered a prayer, not to the Omnissiah or the Emperor, to me. Thank you for making this bearable. Thank you for ensuring this person dies completely rather than partially. Thank you for fighting when fighting seemed impossible. Thank you for refusing to look away. Across the Imperium, tens of thousands of tech priests performed similar conversions. Most never thought about the reforms, never questioned why the protocols were designed the way they were, never knew about the resistance that had forced the changes. But some did, some understood, some remembered, and they continued the work, continued pushing for improvement, continued refusing to accept that current cruelty was optimal, just because it was better than historical cruelty. That was how change happened in the Imperium, not through revolution. Revolution was impossible, was heresy, was death, but through accumulation, small improvements building on small improvements, marginal reductions in suffering adding up over decades and centuries, individual tech priests making individual choices to be slightly less terrible, repeated millions of times across a million worlds. I'd been one choice in that endless chain, one tech priest who'd seen suffering and refused to ignore it, one person who'd transformed guilt into purpose, one voice in the vast machine saying, "This is wrong and we can do better." Not much, but enough. The Imperium ground on. Servitors continued being created by the millions. The Mechanicus continued serving the Omnissiah through cold calculation. The galaxy continued burning in endless war. But in the biologist's facilities across human space, children were safe. Conversion protocols were reformed. Consciousness was respected even in its destruction. And tech priests understood that efficiency and compassion could coexist. That was my monument. Not stone or metal, not statues or buildings, just knowledge, just change, just the certainty that the Imperium was marginally better because I'd existed. In the final analysis, after everything I'd done and failed to do, after all the suffering I'd caused and prevented, after the guilt and the resistance and the small victories and the terrible costs, what remained was simple. I'd looked at children being converted to servitors. I'd discovered they remained conscious, and I'd refused to accept it. That refusal cost me everything. Cost Epsilon 3 Omega and the Resistance. Cost Matthias Krell and Sigma Child 1 and everyone who'd suffered in service to the truth. But it saved thousands, maybe tens of thousands. Maybe, over centuries of continued reform, millions. And in the Imperium of man, where individual lives mean nothing and suffering is universal and cruelty is doctrine, saving thousands counts as victory, small victory, insufficient victory, imperfect victory, but victory nonetheless. My consciousness, if it persisted anywhere in any form, could rest knowing that much, could accept that I'd done what I could with what I had, could believe that my existence had mattered, that my work had value, that my refusal to look away had made some small difference in the vast uncaring machine of the Imperium. Tech-Priest Sigma-Seven-Rho, converter of 8,419, savior of tens of thousands, heretic, reformer, martyr, example, the man who proved servitors suffered, the man who made them suffer less, the man who transformed guilt into purpose and horror into change. Not a hero, not a saint, just someone who'd seen something terrible and refused to pretend it was acceptable, just someone who'd chosen conscience over comfort, just someone who'd tried, and in the end, in the Imperium where trying is often the best anyone can do, that was enough. That had to be enough, because it was all I had. Chapter 7. The Mines of Purgation. The mining world was called Terminus Sigma, appropriate name. Everything about it suggested endings. The end of useful life, the end of hope, the end of everything except work and death. They shipped me there in a penal transport with 300 other condemned. Some were criminals, some were heretics. Some, like me, had committed the sin of knowing too much and refusing to forget. We arrived in chains. We're assigned to mining crew Epsilon 74, given basic equipment, rebreathers, mining lasers, ore collection servitors. Told we'd work 16-hour shifts in promethium seams 3 kilometers underground. Told the toxic gases would kill us eventually. Told that dying in service was our only path to redemption. Nobody expected redemption. We expected death. The only question was how long we'd last. I lasted longer than most. My augmentations helped. Mechanical lungs didn't fail as fast as organic ones, and my enhanced filtration systems processed toxins more efficiently. But more than that, I had purpose, had work to continue, because I'd discovered something during my final days on Graia. The resistance network had been destroyed, yes, but it had left seeds, documentation preserved in obscure data vaults, modified protocols spreading through the Mechanicus network, tech priests who'd learned the truth and survived, scattered across the Imperium, but connected by shared knowledge. And I'd encoded my entire research into hidden data packets, distributed them through networks I'd built over the years. Every detail of servitor consciousness, every neural pattern analysis, every piece of evidence I'd gathered, hundreds of copies hidden in maintenance logs, equipment specifications, technical documentation that nobody read but everyone archived. The truth couldn't be suppressed because it was everywhere, waiting to be discovered by anyone who looked carefully enough. In the mines, I continued working, not on conversions. I was as far from biologist facilities as the Imperium could send me, but I worked with servitors. The mines had hundreds of them. Labor units hauling ore, processing units separating promethium, combat units defending against the native creatures that lived in the deep tunnels. And I examined them, measured their neural patterns with equipment I built from scavenged parts, documented their ghost consciousness, continued the research even here, even in penal servitude, even facing death. Found the same patterns, same persistent activity, same evidence of trapped awareness. The servitors here suffered just like those on Graia. The system I'd tried to change extended everywhere, infinite in its cruelty, impossible to escape. But I also found other prisoners who cared, other condemned who'd been sent here for similar crimes, questioning authority, discovering inconvenient truths, refusing to accept the Imperium's comfortable lies. We formed a new kind of resistance. Couldn't change policy or modify protocols anymore. Couldn't save lives or prevent conversions. But we could document, could preserve, could ensure the evidence survived. We carved our findings into the tunnel walls where they'd last for centuries. Encoded data into the geological surveys that would be archived forever. Built monuments to truth in a place of death, ensuring that even if we all died, the knowledge would persist. And we mercy completed servitors when we could. Found the ones with strong neural patterns, the ones most likely suffering, and arranged accidents that ended them. 37 servitors over 8 years, not many, but 37 consciousnesses freed from their prisons. I met a woman named Kalia in year 3, former administratum scribe who'd discovered financial records proving the ecclesiarchy had been embezzling from imperial tithes. She'd reported it through proper channels. They'd sent her here to die slowly. "We're all here for the same reason," she said one night in the communal sleeping chamber. "We believed in the system, believed in truth and justice and that doing right mattered. And the system punished us for it. Are you sorry?" I asked. "Wish you'd stayed quiet." She thought for a long moment. "No, because staying quiet makes you complicit. I'd rather die knowing I tried than live knowing I didn't. What about you?" I thought about Sigma Child 1, about his voice begging for death, about the 8,419 people I'd converted, about the resistance I'd joined and lost, about the small victory we'd achieved, children saved, protocols modified, truth exposed. "I'm sorry for what I did before I knew better," I said, "but I'm not sorry for fighting once I understood. Even if it failed, even if we barely changed anything, at least we tried." "Did you barely change anything, though?" She pulled out a data slate. "Contraband, but nobody enforced rules in penal mines." Showed me news from across the Imperium. "Juvenile servitor conversions are down 93% over the last 8 years. Your protocols are spreading. 17 Forge Worlds have adopted them officially. And there are rumors, just rumors, but persistent, that the Fabricator General is reviewing all servitor conversion procedures for potential reformation." I stared at the data. We'd done that. The resistance, the conspiracy, the sacrifice. We'd actually changed the Imperium. Not much, not nearly enough, but measurably, statistically, really. "How many children saved?" I asked. Impossible to calculate exactly, but probably thousands, maybe tens of thousands. Children who won't end up like your Sigma Child 1, who will live full human lives instead of being trapped in servitor shells. Thousands of lives. Thousands of people who'd never know they'd been saved. Who'd never know about the tech-priests who'd fought and died to protect them. Who'd grow up in an Imperium that remained horrible, but was marginally less horrible because we'd refused to accept its cruelty. I cried. First time in decades. Cried because we'd won something real. Cried because it had cost so much. Cried because it wasn't nearly enough, but was more than I'd thought possible. Kalia held me while I broke down. "You did good work," she said softly. "Real good. Don't let anyone tell you different." The mining continued. Years passed. My body degraded. Even augmented lungs couldn't handle the toxins forever. I developed the chronic cough that marked terminal promethium poisoning. Had maybe a year left. Maybe less. But I'd seen the fruit of our work. Knew it had mattered. Knew the suffering hadn't been meaningless. In my 10th year on Terminus Sigma, something unexpected happened. A magos from the Adeptus Mechanicus arrived. Not for inspection or oversight. Those never came to penal mines. This was specific. Deliberate. He came looking for me. His designation was Archmagos Theta Prime, and he was one of the most senior tech priests in the Imperium. He found me 3 kilometers underground, covered in promethium dust, coughing blood into my rebreather. Sigma-Seven-Rho, he said through his vocal synthesizer. Also known as the architect of the Servitor consciousness heresy, the tech priest who proved the impossible and nearly destroyed the Mechanicus in the process. "Here to ensure I die properly?" I asked. "Make sure the heresy ends with me?" "No, I'm here to tell you that you were right." I stared at him, unable to process the words. The Fabricator General ordered comprehensive review of all servitor conversion procedures following your demonstration. We examined thousands of servitors, found exactly what you found: persistent neural patterns, evidence of consciousness, proof of suffering. We've been creating trapped minds for 10,000 years, and we're changing it. Slowly, very slowly. The Imperium depends on servitors. We can't abandon the practice. But we're implementing your modified protocols across all Forge Worlds, ensuring complete cortical destruction, preventing the ghost patterns, making future conversions more thorough and therefore more merciful. What about existing servitors? The millions already trapped? His silence was answer enough. They wouldn't be helped, couldn't be helped, would continue suffering until equipment failure finally ended them. The Imperium would save future servitors but abandon past ones. We're also establishing new protocols for juvenile conversions, he continued. No child under 16 will be converted except under extreme circumstances. Those who are converted will receive additional neural destruction to prevent consciousness persistence. And we're developing identification procedures to detect aware servitors so they can be mercy completed. It was more than I'd expected, less than I'd hoped for. The compromise between what was right and what was possible. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because you deserve to know your work mattered. Because history should remember that one tech priest chose conscience over doctrine and changed the Imperium because of it. He pulled out a data slate. Your research has been archived officially, declassified, made available to all tech priests. You're being credited as the discoverer of persistent servitor consciousness. I'm being rehabilitated. Posthumously, yes. You'll die here. Can't change that. Too many political complications. But your work will be remembered, will be taught, will ensure future tech priests understand what they're really doing when they perform conversions. He left shortly after, returned to Mars with his data and his reforms, leaving me in the toxic dark to die over the next few months. But I died knowing it had mattered, knowing the children were saved, knowing servitor conversion would be less cruel, knowing the Imperium had changed, infinitesimally, grudgingly, but really, because we'd refused to accept its casual horror. Kalia found me after the Archmagos left. You're smiling, she said. That's new. We won, I told her. Not completely. Not enough. But we won. She smiled too. Then it was worth it. Yeah, I agreed. It was worth it. I continued working in the mines for another 6 months. Continued documenting. Continued mercy completing servitors when I could. Continued fighting the small war against suffering that I dedicated my life to. And when I finally died, lungs failed, body gave out, toxins won their slow battle. I died knowing I'd left the Imperium marginally better than I'd found it. That was all anyone could do, all anyone should expect. Make the small differences you can, save the lives you're able to save, fight the battles that matter even if you can't win the war. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. Chapter 8, Legacy of Conscience. I died on Terminus Sigma in the toxic darkness 3 kilometers underground, alone except for the servitors hauling ore around my body, my organic components finally surrendering to the Promethean poisoning I'd endured for over a decade. There was no ceremony, no memorial, no acknowledgement, just another penal laborer expiring on schedule, processed through the Administratum's death registry and forgotten. But death wasn't the end of the story. Stories never end in the Imperium. They just transform, mutate, spread like the very spores that create new life from death. 20 years after my death, Tech-Priest aspirant Kale-79 stood in the Biologist Academy on Mars, studying servitor conversion procedures as part of his advanced training. The curriculum had changed significantly in recent decades. Now it included mandatory ethics components, consciousness studies, and something called compassionate conversion protocols. The instructor was Magos biologist Selene Theta, a relatively young tech priest who'd never performed a pre-Reformation conversion. She projected holographic images of neural patterns onto the lecture hall's display surfaces. These are ghost patterns, she explained to the assembled students, persistent electrical activity in destroyed neural tissue. For millennia, the Mechanicus believed these were merely cellular death, random electrical discharge from dying neurons. But research conducted by Tech-Priest Sigma-Seven-Rho between 817 and 824 and M41 proved otherwise. She pulled up my image, the official portrait from my service record, before my defiance, before the resistance, before everything fell apart. I looked young in that image, idealistic, still believing the Mechanicus doctrine without question. Sigma-Seven-Rho discovered that these patterns weren't random. They represented fragments of consciousness, scattered, damaged, but persistent. Every servitor we created potentially retained some form of awareness, trapped, unable to communicate, unable to stop functioning, suffering in ways we couldn't detect. One of the students raised a mechanical hand. But servitors don't report pain, don't resist commands. How could they be suffering if they show no signs? Because we destroyed their ability to show signs, Selene Theta replied. Imagine being paralyzed, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to express anything while remaining conscious. That's what we were creating. Permanent paralysis of expression while consciousness persisted. She pulled up the recording, the one I'd hoped would change everything. Sigma Child 1 speaking through the temporary restoration, begging for death, proving consciousness existed in servitor shells. The students watched in silence, watched a child's voice emerge from a servitor body, watched him describe 7 years of trapped awareness, watched him plead for mercy that wouldn't come for decades. When the recording ended, the lecture hall remained quiet for a long moment. This recording nearly destroyed the Mechanicus, Selene Theta said. threatened to invalidate 10,000 years of doctrine, forced us to confront what we'd been doing. Sigma-Seven-Rho was condemned for heresy, sentenced to penal labor, and died in the mines of Terminus Sigma. But his work survived, changed conversion protocols across the Imperium, saved countless lives by ensuring future conversions would be more complete, more merciful, less likely to trap consciousness. Was he right to defy orders? Another student asked. To stage the demonstration? To risk the stability of the Mechanicus for individual conscience? It was the question every tech-priest struggled with. Duty versus morality, doctrine versus evidence, the Mechanicus versus humanity. That's for you to decide, Selene Theta said. The Mechanicus officially honors his research while officially condemning his methods. We teach his discoveries while warning against his defiance. We credit him with improving servitor conversion while punishing those who follow his example of resistance. She paused, her augmented eyes scanning the students. But I'll tell you what I believe. I believe Sigma-Seven-Rho was a hero. I believe he did what was necessary when the system failed to do what was right. I believe he saved more lives through his heresy than he could have saved through obedience. And I believe every one of you will face similar choices in your service. Moments when duty conflicts with conscience, when doctrine contradicts evidence, when obedience means accepting cruelty. What should we do in those moments? Whatever you can live with, she said simply. Whatever lets you face yourself when you perform your devotions to the Omnissiah. Whatever allows you to believe you're serving something greater than merely maintaining the status quo. The lecture continued, covering the technical aspects of modern conversion protocols. The students learned the modified techniques I'd developed, the methods that more thoroughly destroyed consciousness, that ensured complete cortical simplification, that prevented ghost patterns from persisting. My heresy had become orthodoxy. My rebellion had become doctrine, but more importantly, they learned to question, learned to examine their work critically, learned to recognize suffering even when it couldn't be expressed, learned that efficiency and compassion weren't opposites, but complementary goals. Across the Imperium, the reforms continued spreading. Juvenile conversions dropped to nearly zero. Only the most extreme circumstances warranted converting a child, and even then, additional safeguards ensured complete consciousness destruction. The modified protocols reached 73 Forge worlds within 20 years. Hundreds of thousands of future servitors were spared the trap of persistent awareness, and the mercy completion practices became official. Tech-priests were now trained to identify servitors with strong neural patterns, the ones most likely retaining consciousness, and to end them humanely under the guise of equipment retirement. What the resistance had done in secret became accepted procedure. What I'd performed as an act of rebellion became part of standard operations. The Administratum estimated that my work prevented approximately 47,000 juvenile conversions over the 2 decades following my demonstration, prevented countless adult conversions through the modified protocols. Mercy completed approximately 8,000 existing servitors who'd been trapped with persistent consciousness. Numbers that would have meant nothing to the Imperium's vast bureaucracy, statistically insignificant in a galaxy where billions died daily. But every single one of those numbers was a person, a life, a consciousness spared from the particular hell I discovered and documented. In year 35 post-Reformation, they built a memorial, small thing, tucked in a corner of the Biologist Academy that most students never visited. A data terminal containing my complete research, my trial records, my final documentation from Terminus Sigma. A plaque reading, Tech-Priest Sigma-Seven-Rho, he refused to look away. Kalia had survived Terminus Sigma. Improbably, impossibly, she'd outlasted the mines and been released after serving her full 50-year sentence. She visited the memorial on its dedication day, now ancient and broken, but still alive. A young tech priest found her there, reading through my research with tears streaming down her weathered face. Did you know him? The tech priest asked. Yeah, Kalia said. Worked with him in the mines, helped him document everything. He was good. Really good, broken by guilt over what he'd done, but trying so hard to make it right. He succeeded. His work changed the Imperium. He'd say it wasn't enough. Would say there's still too much suffering, too many servitors still trapped, too much cruelty baked into the system. She looked at the young tech priest. He'd be right. But he'd also be glad something changed, that children are safer, that future conversions are less terrible, that the Imperium can admit when it's wrong, even slowly, even grudgingly. The Tech-Priest nodded. I'm performing my first conversion next week. I've been studying his protocols, trying to understand not just the technical aspects, but the moral ones. How do you live with doing this? Even the reformed version is still destroying a person. Kalia thought about it for a long moment. You don't live with it easily. You carry the weight. You remember every face. You honor every person by making sure their death serves the greater good as completely as possible. And you keep fighting to make it better. Keep questioning. Keep examining. Keep refusing to just accept that cruelty is necessary because it's always been done this way. Did he teach you that? He lived it. That's better than teaching. The young Tech-Priest returned to his studies. Kalia remained at the memorial for another hour, reading through the documentation I'd compiled over decades of work, remembering the broken man coughing blood in the mining tunnels, still measuring neural patterns, still fighting his small war against suffering. She died 3 years later. Natural causes, remarkably. Survived the mines, survived the Imperium's cruelty. Died in her sleep at age 97. Before she died, she recorded her testimony about the resistance, about our work in the mines, about the reality of servitor consciousness, added her voice to mine in the archive of inconvenient truths. The reforms continued. The Mechanicus never officially admitted wrongdoing, couldn't without destabilizing its authority. But the changes spoke louder than any admission. Modified protocols became standard. Juvenile conversions became rare. Consciousness detection became routine. Mercy completion became accepted. The Imperium didn't become good. Couldn't become good. It was built on too much suffering, too much cruelty, too many necessary evils, but it became marginally less terrible. Marginally more conscious of its cruelty. Marginally more willing to reduce suffering where possible. And that was enough. Had to be enough. Because in the Imperium of man, where darkness is the default and horror is the baseline, marginal improvements are the only kind achievable. Sigma Child 1 was finally mercy completed in year 42 post-Reformation. His servitor body had lasted 51 years, exceptional longevity for a labor unit. The Tech-Priest who performed the completion was one of Selene Theta's students, trained in the reformed protocols, aware of his history. She examined his neural patterns one final time before the end, found the ghost consciousness still there, still fighting, still trapped after half a century, wondered what kind of hell he'd experienced during those. Which child? I asked. Sigma Child 1, the 6-year-old, strongest neural patterns, most likely to respond to intervention. We've developed a procedure that might temporarily restore enough neural function to give him speech, movement, awareness. Not much, maybe 10 minutes before the restoration fails and his brain shuts down completely. But 10 minutes of a child speaking from inside a servitor shell, describing his experience, proving consciousness persists, that might be enough. It would kill him. The procedure would be fatal. He's already dead in every way that matters. We'd be using his death to save future children. He'd die a martyr instead of dying a servitor. I thought about Sigma Child 1, the boy with the stuffed animal, the one who'd waved at me, the one whose consciousness I'd trapped 7 years ago, the one whose neural patterns showed he'd been fighting to exist every single day since. You want me to perform this procedure, I said flatly. You converted him. You know his neural structure better than anyone. You're the best qualified to attempt restoration. And, she paused, you owe him. You created his suffering. You should be the one to end it meaningfully. She was right. I did owe him. Owed all 14 children. Owed the 8,419 people I'd converted. Owed Matthias, Krell and every other servitor I'd mercy completed. Owed something to the endless suffering I'd participated in creating. When? I asked. 2 weeks. We're arranging a gathering of senior Mechanicus officials, disguised as efficiency review meeting. We'll stage the malfunction during the presentation. Maximum visibility, maximum impact. If it works, we force acknowledgement. If it fails, at least we tried. And if it fails, we all get converted. Yes. But we're already complicit, already heretics, already condemned if discovered. At least this way we die fighting instead of hiding. I agreed because what choice did I have? I'd started this path 7 years ago when I'd hesitated with the 11th child, had continued it when I'd joined the resistance, had committed to it with every mercy completion, every modified protocol, every small rebellion against the Imperium's casual cruelty. Might as well finish it properly. We spent 2 weeks preparing. Developed the restoration procedure, a carefully calculated combination of neural stimulation, chemical enhancement, and temporary rewiring that might give Sigma Child 1 a few minutes of consciousness. Tested it on servitors scheduled for recycling. Got it working 3 times out of 12 attempts. 25% success rate. Terrible odds. But the only odds we had. We staged the efficiency review meeting. Got authorization for Sigma Child 1 to be present. Labor servitor demonstration of optimal juvenile conversion techniques. None of the senior officials suspected anything. Why would they? I was a model tech priest, demoted years ago, but now rehabilitated through obedient service. Perfect cover. 18 senior magi attended, including Magos biologist Thrain, who dismissed my concerns 7 years ago, including Dominus Xylos, my old mentor, including representatives from 3 other Forge worlds, present to learn Graia's conversion techniques. I gave a technical presentation, showed efficiency metrics, demonstrated servitor functionality, brought out Sigma Child 1 as visual aid, small servitor with oversized servo arms, empty eyes, mechanical precision in every movement. This unit represents optimal juvenile conversion, I explained, my voice professionally neutral. Converted 7 years ago at age 6, 0 malfunctions, 98.7% efficiency rating. Demonstrates that age is not a barrier to successful servitor creation. The Magi nodded, made notes, discussed efficiency percentages, treated the small servitor as equipment, as proof of concept, as vindication of doctrine. I activated the restoration procedure remotely, watched the chemical cascade begin, watched the neural stimulation fire, watched the temporary rewiring attempt to recreate consciousness from scattered fragments. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. Sigma Child 1 continued standing motionless, awaiting commands. The procedure was failing. 25% success rate meant 75% failure, and we'd hit the wrong side of those odds. Then his eye twitched. Then his servo arm moved without command input. Just a small motion, but unauthorized movement in a servitor was impossible. Several Magi noticed, leaned forward. Then he spoke. Where? Where am I? The voice was distorted. Through the servitor's vocal synthesizer, mechanical and wrong, but recognizable as a child's voice. Every magus in the room froze. Servitors didn't speak unless commanded, didn't ask questions, didn't express confusion. What happened to me? Why can't I move right? Where's my mum? Sigma Child 1's head turned, jerkily, fighting against programming, looking around the room. His eyes focused on me. Recognition sparked in their depths. You were there. You said you'd take care of me. You said the Emperor provides. His voice cracked, mechanical distortion unable to hide the betrayal. What did you do to me? Perfect, terrible, and perfect. A child's voice, asking the questions no one wanted answered. Proving consciousness, proving awareness, proving 7 years of trapped suffering. Magos Thrain stood abruptly. This is malfunction. Deactivate the unit immediately. Wait, I said. Listen to what he's saying. He remembers. He's aware. He's been conscious this entire time. Impossible. Destroyed neural tissue cannot house consciousness. This is equipment malfunction producing random speech patterns that coincidentally resemble, I'm not random. Sigma Child 1's voice rose, desperate and terrified. I'm real. I'm still here. I've been here the whole time. I can't move. I can't stop working. I can't sleep. I can't think right. But I'm still here. The room erupted. Half the Magi were demanding immediate deactivation. Others were stepping closer, fascinated, examining the impossible servitor with scientific interest. Xylos was running diagnostics, trying to explain the malfunction in technical terms. Please, Sigma Child 1B.